What if your desire to be good is exactly what makes you easy to manipulate? It's a strange and unsettling thought, isn't it? That the very values we cling to, kindness, integrity, empathy, might, in the wrong hands or the wrong context, become instruments of control. In a world that often celebrates niceness over nuance, politeness over boundaries, and harmony over honesty, we have to ask, what is the real cost of always trying to be good? The truth is, many of us were never taught to hold our power well. We were taught to be liked, to avoid conflict, to please others, and to conflate morality with obedience. But history, psychology, and our own lived experiences whisper something different. Goodness without discernment can be dangerous. In the hands of the wrong people, it becomes currency, something others can spend without ever having earned. This script is not about discarding goodness, it's about understanding its shadow. And to do that, we turn to one of history's most misunderstood minds, Niccolò Machiavelli. For centuries, his name has been synonymous with cunning, manipulation, and cold ambition. But behind the caricature lies something deeper, a ruthless honesty about human nature and power, a set of ideas that, while uncomfortable, might just be necessary if we want to live with integrity and agency. Machiavelli didn't necessarily tell us to be immoral. He told us to be strategic. He argued that virtue, if not paired with vigilance, makes us vulnerable, that idealism without realism invites exploitation. His most famous work, The Prince, written in the early 16th century, wasn't a celebration of evil. It was a survival guide for navigating power in a flawed world. And while we may not be Renaissance princes fighting for Italian city-states, many of us are fighting invisible battles every day, at work, in relationships, in our own minds. Battles where authenticity clashes with approval, where vision struggles against compromise, where power dynamics play out in subtle, psychological ways. This is why Machiavelli still matters. Because even now, 5 centuries later, we live in a world where soft people get hardened by betrayal, where kind hearts are exploited by those without one, and where leaders are made, or broken, not by what they believe, but by how well they understand human nature. So, in this exploration, we'll dive deep into the dark side of goodness, not to justify cruelty, but to illuminate clarity. We'll blend historical insight, modern psychology, and personal reflection to understand what it really means to be both good and wise. We'll ask uncomfortable questions. We'll challenge familiar narratives. And we'll look at how reclaiming our power doesn't mean losing our soul. Because maybe the real lesson isn't that goodness is weak, but that true goodness, the kind that survives the storm, needs a backbone made of discernment and fire. Let's begin. To understand the dark side of goodness, we must begin with a question as old as civilization itself. Can a person be both good and powerful? For much of history, societies have grappled with the uneasy relationship between virtue and influence. From religious teachings to philosophical treatises, from sacred texts to political manifestos, thinkers have wrestled with this paradox. How can one lead with compassion and still survive in a world shaped by ambition, competition, and betrayal? In ancient times, the Greeks laid the groundwork for this tension. Plato, in the Republic, envisioned a society ruled by philosopher kings, leaders guided by wisdom and moral clarity. To him, justice was the soul's harmony, and a truly good leader must be led by the rational part of the psyche, not by desire or fear. But even Plato, for all his idealism, understood that such harmony was rare and easily disrupted by the messiness of human nature. Aristotle, more pragmatic than his teacher, believed in cultivating virtue ethics, that character, more than rules or consequences, should guide our choices. Yet even he acknowledged that politics was the art of the possible, not the perfect. Leaders, in his view, must be able to balance moral ideals with practical governance. And then, centuries later, came Niccolò Machiavelli, a man who shattered the illusion that virtue alone could govern effectively. Machiavelli's radical honesty. Born in 1469 in Florence, Italy, Machiavelli was a diplomat, philosopher, and political theorist who lived during a time of constant upheaval, wars between city-states, foreign invasions, and betrayal at every turn. He wasn't writing from an ivory tower. He wrote from the trenches of realpolitik, where survival meant understanding the mechanics of power, not just the morality of intention. In The Prince, 1513, Machiavelli flips the script. Instead of asking, "How can we be good rulers?" he asks, "How do rulers survive?" He writes that it is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both. That appearances often matter more than truth. That a leader must be willing to act immorally when necessary, not because they're evil, but because the world is. He introduces the concept of virtù, not virtue as we understand it, but a kind of bold, adaptive strength. It's the ability to navigate fortune, to shape events with cunning and courage. Many found his ideas dangerous. The church blacklisted his works. His name became a synonym for manipulation. But buried beneath the cynicism is something profound. Machiavelli wasn't promoting evil. He was confronting reality. He was warning us that goodness, if naive, can be our undoing, that moral purity without strategic awareness leads not to sainthood, but to irrelevance, or worse, destruction. Historical echoes of the good betrayed. History is full of figures whose idealism led to ruin because they lacked the ruthlessness of their enemies. Consider the story of Julius Caesar's assassination, not merely a tale of betrayal, but a lesson in how political naivete can turn allies into executioners. Caesar believed in his vision for Rome, but his trust in those around him cost him everything. Or take Jesus of Nazareth, a figure of unparalleled moral vision. Whether viewed through religious or historical lenses, his crucifixion was, in part, a clash between radical compassion and institutional power. His message of love was revolutionary and dangerous to those who feared its implications. His death is not a condemnation of goodness, but a stark reminder of what it costs in a world ruled by fear and dominance. In the 20th century, Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. carried the torch of moral leadership. They were visionaries who believed in nonviolence and justice, but both were assassinated. Their lives reveal a painful truth. Goodness can inspire the masses, but it also threatens the status quo. And when systems feel threatened, they respond with force. These aren't arguments against being good. They are calls to be wise about how we carry our goodness in a world that often punishes it. The evolution of power and morality. Fast forward to the modern era, and the dance between morality and power continues. Only now, the battleground has shifted. It's no longer just kings, clergy, and conquerors. Today, power operates in boardrooms, social media platforms, algorithms, and quiet psychological exchanges in everyday life. We are constantly told to be kind, to be generous, to forgive, but we are rarely taught how to protect ourselves while doing so. Our cultural emphasis on emotional intelligence and compassion is beautiful, but incomplete if it doesn't also teach boundaries, assertiveness, and critical thinking. Without those, goodness becomes a liability. And here lies the continuity. What Machiavelli wrote about 500 years ago remains true. Those who do not understand power are often at its mercy. Whether it's an employee being exploited by a charismatic boss, a partner losing themselves in a toxic relationship, or a visionary silenced in a bureaucratic system, these are modern echoes of ancient themes. The moral illusion. Why we confuse niceness with goodness. Another complication arises from how we define goodness itself. In many cultures, especially those with Judeo-Christian roots, goodness is equated with selflessness, sacrifice, humility. These are noble traits, but when taken to extremes, they become self-erasure. Modern psychology now recognizes this pattern: people-pleasing, fawning responses, chronic guilt. All are symptoms of an imbalanced moral identity, where being good means never saying no, never disappointing, never holding others accountable. But this isn't goodness, it's fear in a moral disguise. True goodness is not passive. It doesn't avoid conflict at all costs. It protects what matters. It holds firm when it must. It is not afraid to say no. And this is precisely where Machiavelli's legacy deserves a second look, not as a call to abandon ethics, but as an invitation to grow up morally, to stop equating kindness with weakness, to become people who can love deeply and lead wisely, who can be compassionate without being consumed. Reclaiming Machiavelli. Today, there is a quiet renaissance of interest in Machiavelli, not as a villain, but as a realist. Scholars and thinkers are beginning to see the nuance in his work. His warnings are not irrelevant. They are urgently necessary, especially in an age where soft power is everywhere and psychological manipulation is an everyday occurrence. To reclaim Machiavelli is to reclaim our complexity, to admit that being good isn't always safe, that protecting your soul sometimes means making hard choices, that integrity doesn't mean always saying yes, it often means saying no, even when it hurts, and that perhaps the most powerful goodness of all is the one that sees clearly into the heart of darkness and chooses to stand tall anyway. The psychology of being too good. Why we betray ourselves in the name of virtue. There's a strange kind of suffering that comes with always trying to be good. It doesn't scream like trauma, nor does it draw attention like anger or fear. It's quieter, more subtle, like a slow erosion of self. You smile when you want to speak up. You say yes when every part of you aches for no. You give chances to people who have only taken advantage. You carry the weight of being kind like it's your proof of worth. And underneath it all, there's an aching question that many of us are too afraid to ask out loud. Why does being good hurt so much? To answer this, we need to enter the terrain of modern psychology, where our understanding of power, selfhood, and moral identity has evolved into something nuanced and profoundly human. The fawn response. When kindness is a survival strategy. In trauma psychology, we often hear of fight, flight, and freeze, but there's a lesser-known fourth response: fawning. Coined by therapist Pete Walker, the fawn response is a survival mechanism rooted in early experiences of emotional neglect, trauma, or unstable relationships. Instead of fighting or fleeing, the fawn adapts by appeasing. They learn to survive not by asserting themselves, but by becoming hyper-attuned to others' needs and emotions, often at the expense of their own. Sound familiar? This is the psychological shadow of goodness, the people-pleaser, the over-apologizer, the one who smiles while bleeding inside. These behaviors aren't weakness, they're adaptations, but over time, they become cages. The person forgets where others end, and they begin. Machiavelli might not have had language like fawn response, but he understood this dynamic in his own way. In The Prince, he warns that leaders who try to be loved by all will eventually be devoured by those who are less sentimental. In psychological terms, those who base their identity on external approval often sacrifice their boundaries, their truth, and their sense of self, until there's nothing left but resentment hidden behind a polite mask. The goodness complex, moral identity, and the fear of rejection. From a social psychology lens, many people form what's known as a moral identity, a deep-seated belief that their value as a human being is tied to being seen as good. This identity can be empowering when integrated healthily, but when it becomes rigid or perfectionistic, it turns into a psychological prison. You might recognize it in thoughts like, if I say no, I'll disappoint them. I can't confront them. It wouldn't be nice. If I speak up, they'll think I'm selfish. What if I hurt their feelings? These thoughts aren't just passing worries. They're the internal monologue of someone who has linked safety, love, and identity with being agreeable. But, as psychologists like Carl Jung have pointed out, what we repress doesn't disappear. It waits in the dark. And the more we disown our anger, boundaries, or assertiveness in the name of being good, the more those disowned parts eventually sabotage us. Jung called this the shadow, the hidden, unconscious parts of ourselves we're taught to reject. Often, our power lives in the shadow, our ability to say no, our capacity for confrontation, even our instincts. If we exile these parts in favor of being nice, we end up vulnerable, not because we lack virtue, but because we've abandoned our wholeness. Social conditioning. How culture rewards compliance disguised as morality. It's important to remember that this isn't just about personal wounds. It's also about systems. From an early age, many of us are conditioned, especially women, empaths, and those in collectivist cultures, to equate goodness with self-sacrifice. To be praised for not making waves, to be rewarded for smiling, staying silent, and enduring. This isn't morality. It's social conditioning designed to uphold power structures, and it's often gendered, racialized, or class-based. Think about how the strong leader is often admired for being decisive and bold, while the good woman is praised for being nurturing and agreeable. Or how assertiveness in men is seen as leadership, while the same in women is labeled aggressive. These aren't moral judgments, they're scripts. And the more we internalize them, the more we mistake obedience for goodness and people-pleasing for love. Machiavelli's genius was not in promoting manipulation, but in seeing through these scripts. He understood that morality, like power, is contextual, that what's praised as virtuous in one culture may be punished in another, that to navigate the human experience with clarity, we need more than a desire to do good. We need the wisdom to see when goodness is being used against us. Archetypes and ancient mirrors, Jung, Sufism, and the warrior within. To go even deeper, let's return to Jung, who believed that we are all shaped by archetypes, universal patterns that live in the collective unconscious. Among these is the hero, the caregiver, the innocent, but also the warrior, the magician, and the rebel. Most people striving to be good get stuck in the caregiver or innocent. They give, they trust, they avoid conflict. But real transformation requires integrating the other archetypes too. The warrior says no when needed. The magician sees through illusion. The rebel disrupts injustice, even when it's unpopular. This integration is echoed in Sufi wisdom as well. The Sufi path is one of deep love and divine surrender, but it's not passive. It asks for courage. In the Sufi tradition, nafs, the lower self or ego, must be confronted, but so must false humility and spiritual pride. One must burn away illusions to find truth. And sometimes that truth includes protecting the soul fiercely. Goodness, in this deeper sense, is not about avoiding discomfort. It's about honoring the soul's integrity, even when it costs you approval. The modern crisis, emotional labor, and identity fragmentation. In today's hyper-connected, emotionally demanding world, we are asked to be good on so many levels at once that our psyches fragment under the pressure. We're told to be emotionally available, but not too sensitive. To be inclusive, but not confrontational. To support others even when we're running on empty. To forgive, move on, stay kind, no matter what. This is the new face of emotional labor. And while compassion is beautiful, we are burning out because we're trying to be everything for everyone while abandoning ourselves. This dissonance between the self we are and the self we perform creates what psychologists call identity fragmentation. Over time, this leads to anxiety, resentment, even depression. Not because we've done something wrong, but because we've lost access to our own authenticity. And authenticity isn't just a buzzword, it's your internal compass. Without it, you can't tell whether your kindness is coming from love or fear, whether your generosity is genuine or performative, whether your silence is wise or wounded. So, what do we do with all this? How do we stop betraying ourselves in the name of being good? That's what we'll explore in the next section, Impact and Consequences, where we'll look at how this split between virtue and power affects our relationships, careers, self-worth, and legacy. But before we go there, here's a question worth sitting with. When you say yes, who are you protecting? And who are you abandoning? When goodness hurts, the hidden costs of denying power. Most of us don't notice when it starts. The first few times it seems noble. You give more than you get. You overlook a slight. You forgive quickly. You say yes because you don't want to disappoint. Maybe you call it empathy, compassion, maturity. Maybe you even feel proud of how much you can tolerate. But over time, something shifts. You start to feel invisible in your own life. You speak less and smile more. You help others rise while quietly sinking inside, and somewhere deep within, a voice whispers, "I don't feel like myself anymore." This is the hidden cost of misunderstood goodness. In this section, we'll explore how this distortion of virtue, this rejection of our right to hold power, protect ourselves, and speak our truth, slowly eats away at the very things goodness is meant to nurture: our identity, relationships, confidence, and sense of purpose. The fragmented self. Losing touch with who we are. When we constantly choose harmony over honesty or sacrifice over self-respect, we begin to erode our own sense of identity. Many people who struggle with being too good reach a point where they no longer know what they really want. They've spent so much time accommodating others that their own desires have gone silent. Their dreams are muted. Their preferences feel irrelevant. Even simple questions, "What do you enjoy? What do you need? What do you feel?" become hard to answer. This isn't just emotional confusion, it's a psychological fragmentation. As Carl Rogers, one of the pioneers of humanistic psychology, noted, the path to well-being is congruence, alignment between our inner truth and outer behavior. When that alignment is broken repeatedly in the name of being good, we become divided within ourselves. And division breeds pain. In a sense, every time we suppress our truth to appear kind, we fracture just a little. And over the years, those fractures widen into a quiet inner emptiness that no amount of people-pleasing can fill. Emotional exhaustion. When compassion turns into burnout. There's a fine line between empathy and enmeshment, between caring for someone and carrying them. Many people who pride themselves on being generous, emotionally available, and forgiving end up drained, resentful, and overwhelmed. They're praised for being dependable and selfless, but they're silently running on emotional fumes. This is what psychologist Christina Maslach refers to as emotional burnout, a state of chronic depletion caused by constant caregiving without replenishment or boundaries. What begins as genuine love eventually becomes obligation, and what once felt like purpose now feels like pressure. This emotional burnout isn't exclusive to healthcare workers or social workers. It shows up in parents who never rest, friends who absorb everyone's pain, employees who overdeliver, and partners who give endlessly hoping to be loved back. Here's the paradox. People who are always good often find themselves surrounded by people who take them for granted. Why? Because when goodness is unboundaried, it creates imbalance. And in systems, whether families, friendships, or workplaces, imbalance breeds entitlement. Just like Machiavelli warned, if your goodness makes you predictable, people will eventually exploit it, not always out of malice, often out of habit. The good partner trap. Misaligned relationships. Nowhere is the cost of distorted virtue more obvious than in our relationships. When we confuse love with endless patience or kindness with unconditional acceptance, we invite dynamics that chip away at intimacy and respect. You may find yourself in relationships where your needs are always second. You're praised for being easygoing, but never really seen. You're the emotional caretaker while the other avoids accountability. You can't express anger without being made to feel guilty. This isn't love, it's imbalance masquerading as connection. Machiavelli would say, "Power is always present in relationships, whether acknowledged or not." If we refuse to own our share of it, we create unspoken hierarchies. Someone always leads, someone always follows. And if we are constantly deferring, we are not being kind. We are disappearing. From a psychological lens, this pattern is often rooted in attachment wounds, early experiences that taught us we must earn love through self-abandonment. But no healthy love can grow on a foundation where one person shrinks so the other can feel safe. Real intimacy requires two whole selves, and that includes the right to disagree, to challenge, to disappoint, to assert, and to be complex. The career cost, the invisible wall of niceness. In professional life, the consequences of goodness without boundaries can be especially sharp. Many emotionally intelligent, empathetic, and cooperative people find themselves stuck. They work hard, support the team, avoid politics, but they're passed over for promotions, sidelined in meetings, or seen as nice but not leadership material. This is the result of what organizational psychologist Adam Grant calls the nice trap, where people mistake agreeableness for weakness and assume that kind individuals lack drive or strategic thinking. But it's not true that you have to be ruthless to succeed. It's that you have to learn how to hold boundaries without apology, how to say no clearly, how to advocate for yourself, how to be respected without betraying your nature. Machiavelli wasn't wrong when he said that appearances matter. In many environments, confidence is mistaken for competence, and hesitation is interpreted as weakness. But that doesn't mean we should become cold or manipulative. It means we must learn to own our presence, to let our goodness speak with clarity, not just softness. Generational echoes. What we pass on. This distortion of goodness doesn't just affect us, it echoes through generations. Children raised by self-sacrificing parents often internalize two conflicting messages. Love means putting others first. Your needs are dangerous or selfish. This sets them up for their own cycles of people-pleasing, burnout, and shame. Unless we break this cycle, unless we teach by example that love includes boundaries and kindness includes truth, we continue to pass on the idea that to be loved, you must disappear. But imagine what it would mean to model a different kind of goodness, one that includes rest, assertiveness, honesty, and self-protection. That version doesn't silence our power, it integrates it, and that's the kind of legacy worth building. We began this journey with Machiavelli. Unsettling question. Can a person be good and still survive in a world shaped by power? By now, we can see that survival isn't the issue. It's wholeness. When goodness is used to avoid discomfort, we survive, but we shrink. When goodness is fused with wisdom, clarity, and boundaries, we thrive. The next section will dive into how we can move toward that integration. We'll look at practices, both ancient and modern, that help us reclaim the parts of ourselves we lost. Not by becoming less good, but by becoming more whole. But first, a pause for thought. What would it mean to stop earning your worth through sacrifice? Who might you become if your goodness included your strength? Let's zoom out. We've explored how the pursuit of goodness, when unbalanced, can erode personal power. But what happens when this pattern plays out, not just in individuals, but across entire communities, organizations, even nations? What happens when a culture begins to reward niceness over honesty, silence over resistance, obedience over integrity? The result isn't peace, it's quiet complicity. It's the slow death of truth in exchange for comfort. It's how empires fall from within, how families rot under the weight of unspoken tensions, how organizations lose their soul while still wearing a smile. This is the collective face of the dark side of goodness. And it's not theoretical, it's happening everywhere. The corporate mask. When good culture breeds suppression, walk into many modern workplaces and you'll hear the same buzzwords: empathy, psychological safety, inclusion, emotional intelligence. But scratch the surface and what you often find is not empowerment, but performance. Smiling faces, curated vulnerability, and open-door policies that quietly punish dissent. In many professional spaces, goodness is coded as agreeability. Speak up too loudly and you're not a team player. Raise concerns and you risk being labeled difficult. Challenge unethical decisions and suddenly your performance is under review. Here, the dark side of goodness isn't a flaw, it's a function. It's how broken systems protect themselves. We are taught to prioritize harmony over honesty, reputation over reality, optics over authenticity. And yet, we wonder, why are so many employees burnt out? Why do high performers silently quit? Why does nothing ever seem to change? Because change requires discomfort, and discomfort is the enemy of false goodness. Families and faith, when love becomes control. Now look at the family, perhaps the most intimate system of all, and also the most psychologically complex. Many of us grew up being told to be good children. But what that often meant was, don't make waves, don't disagree, don't feel too much. Love was conditional. Approval was earned, and we learned to become small, agreeable, and pleasing, not because it was true to us, but because it was safe. In traditional or religious households, this gets layered with moral pressure. Sacrifice yourself for others. Respect your elders, even when they disrespect you. Stay silent, especially if speaking up would bring shame. Here, goodness becomes a prison with velvet walls. It feels noble, even holy, but it can be a cover for control, hierarchy, and the erasure of generational wounds. Many adult children today are not healing from overt abuse, but from years of emotional self-abandonment, camouflaged as virtue. Activism, altruism, and the burnout of the empath. Even in the world of activism and social justice, the dark side of goodness has a foothold. Many who show up to serve others forget to include themselves. Many who speak truth to power struggle to speak kindly to their own bodies. Many who fight for the collective suffer in silence at home. Because when you are taught that goodness means always showing up, always giving, always fighting, you forget that you're a human, not a symbol. This is where burnout hides, not just in overwork, but in the refusal to acknowledge your limits. And often, movements collapse not from external opposition, but from internal depletion. We cannot build sustainable change on the back of self-erasure. Even in altruism, boundaries are a form of wisdom. The cultural lie, the good victim, and selective empathy. Now look at the media, the justice system, the stories we elevate. Notice who gets to be seen as a good victim. Who gets our empathy? Who is allowed to make mistakes and still be redeemed? Goodness in our culture is often racialized, gendered, classed. Anger is dignified in some and criminalized in others. Boundaries are called assertive for one person, aggressive for another. Forgiveness is expected from the oppressed, while the powerful rarely apologize. This is not accidental. This is the moral economy of power, where goodness becomes a tool of respectability politics, a requirement placed on the marginalized to make their pain more palatable to those in comfort. The dark side of collective goodness isn't just about silencing. It's about control. Control of narrative. Control of emotion. Control of whose pain is seen as valid. What do we do with this? First, we remember systems are made of people, and when people change, systems eventually follow. So the first revolution is always internal. When you begin to value truth over politeness, your relationships shift. When you stop rewarding fake harmony, your workplace shifts. When you stop abandoning yourself for peace, your children learn a different model. This is how culture evolves: one boundary, one story, one brave conversation at a time. 3. Small acts of collective courage. 1. Normalize discomfort in dialogue. Whether it's with your boss, your parent, or your community, choose truth over smoothness. Say the thing that needs to be said. Kindness is not the absence of conflict, it's the presence of courage. 2. Reclaim the right to be complex. You don't have to be agreeable to be lovable. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy. Show your anger, your limits, your depth. This is how others learn that they can too. 3. Redefine goodness in your circles. Invite new language. Praise honesty over agreeableness. Celebrate growth over obedience. Let your children, your team, your friends know. Goodness includes saying no. Goodness includes protecting what matters. The final reminder: you are not alone in this work. This is not about discarding goodness. It's about returning it to its full power, a power that includes anger, clarity, complexity, and truth. In a world addicted to ease, your courage to hold tension is revolutionary. In a culture that worships politeness, your refusal to abandon truth is sacred. In systems that reward silence, your voice is a reclamation. Let your goodness no longer be a costume. Let it be a crown, earned not through suffering but through integration. And as you grow stronger in this work, so will the world around you. Are you ready for the next layer of this journey? I can build bonus scripts, guided reflections, journal prompts, or even a companion workbook for this series. Just say the word. If the dark side of goodness is self-erasure, then healing must begin with remembrance, not of rules or roles, but of the self before it became afraid. Before you learned to shrink for love. Before you were taught that your value lived in being agreeable, quiet, or endlessly forgiving. This section is about returning, not to innocence, but to integration. A goodness that includes the sword and the shield. A kindness rooted in truth, not fear. A compassion that knows where it ends and another begins. Let S begin with a principle. You are allowed to be good and powerful at the same time. In fact, your goodness is most potent when it includes your wholeness. The inner compass. Clarity before compassion. One of the simplest but hardest truths is this: you cannot give what you do not own. You cannot be truly compassionate toward others if you are constantly betraying yourself. This is where clarity becomes your first practice. Before choosing the good or kind or generous response, ask, what am I feeling right now? Is this action coming from love or fear? What part of me am I silencing to make this choice? What would I do if I trusted that my needs mattered? These questions are not meant to make you selfish. They are meant to reconnect you to your own inner compass. Compassion without clarity is martyrdom. But compassion with clarity becomes discernment. And discernment is how you give without depletion, love without losing yourself, and say no without guilt. Journal prompt. What does being a good person mean to me? And where did I learn that? Whose voice do I hear when I feel like I have to say yes? From people-pleasing to boundary building, the single most radical act for anyone stuck in distorted goodness is learning to build and hold boundaries. Psychologist Dr. Henry Cloud says, boundaries are not about keeping others out. They're about defining where you end and where you begin. If you've been conditioned to believe that saying no is unkind, setting boundaries will feel unnatural at first. It may even feel cruel, but it is, in fact, the highest form of self-respect. And no true kindness can exist without self-respect. Try this practice. Before committing to anything, pause. Say, Let me think about that and get back to you. Notice your body's response. Does it feel light, aligned, or heavy, obligated? Practice saying no with warmth. I care about you, and I also need to honor my bandwidth right now. Remember, a boundary is not a wall. It's a door with a lock that you control. Over time, people will adapt. The ones who truly care will honor your growth. The ones who only valued your compliance may resist, but that resistance is a revelation, not a reason to fold. Embracing the shadow. Wholeness over perfection. Carl Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." To reclaim powerful goodness, we must stop trying to be only good and instead become whole. This means making peace with the parts of us we've exiled, the anger that tells us a boundary has been crossed, the ambition that longs for expansion, the intuition that sees through manipulation, the self-interest that knows survival is sacred. These aren't flaws, they're functions. And when integrated consciously, they make your goodness more robust, not less. Sufi wisdom speaks to this beautifully. The path to the beloved is not through perfection, but through sincerity. The heart must be broken open again and again, each time revealing more of what is real, not what is expected. Try this. Write down 3 traits you've always judged in yourself, e.g., selfishness, anger, assertiveness. For each one, ask, what wisdom does this part carry? What is it trying to protect me from? Can you imagine a version of you that honors this part with consciousness rather than repression? This is shadow work, not to fix, but to remember. Modern tools. Psychology meets ancient wisdom. Healing the split between goodness and power requires both inner work and outer tools. Let's look at a few that bridge modern psychology and timeless practices. 1. Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, CBT. CBT helps identify and challenge the automatic thoughts that drive behavior. For those stuck in people-pleasing or guilt-driven kindness, this means noticing thoughts like, they'll be upset if I say no, challenging them. Is that my responsibility? What evidence do I have? Replacing them with truth. My needs are valid. I can be kind and clear. 2. Assertive Communication Training. Many of us were never taught how to express needs without guilt. Assertive communication is the middle path between passivity and aggression. It sounds like, I feel overwhelmed and need more space. I'm not available for that, but I hope you find the support you need. That doesn't work for me, and I'd like to talk about a better way forward. 3. Meditation and self-inquiry. Mindfulness isn't just stress relief. It's awareness training. It teaches you to witness your inner responses without reacting. In the Sufi path, this is known as muraqabah, watching the self with loving presence. Try a daily 5-minute check-in. Sit quietly. Ask, where am I abandoning myself today? Listen, not to judge, but to reconnect. 4. Role models and archetypes. Look for new mirrors. We need models of powerful goodness, not saints who never err, but real people who lead with heart and backbone. Study figures like Eleanor Roosevelt, Maya Angelou, Nelson Mandela. Or explore the archetypes, the warrior who protects with honor, the sage who speaks truth, the healer who includes themselves in their circle of care. Let them remind you, you are not here to be small. You are here to be true. To practice powerful goodness is to walk a sacred middle path. Not the path of control, but of clarity. Not the path of perfection, but of presence. Not the path of silence, but of sincere speech. You are allowed to love deeply and still say no. You are allowed to care and still walk away. You are allowed to be good and still be whole. Let this be your new virtue, a soul that includes itself in its compassion, a spirit that honors truth more than approval. a goodness that has edges, not to cut, but to contain. We began with a contradiction. How can goodness, something we're taught to aspire to, become a burden? How can kindness, empathy, and morality, so deeply celebrated across cultures, leave us feeling erased, used, or hollow? But now we see the fuller picture. Goodness, when stripped of boundaries, clarity, and self-respect, becomes a hollow performance. Goodness, when used to escape discomfort or protect an image, becomes manipulation in disguise. And goodness, when it is afraid of power, will always bow before those who are not. This is why Machiavelli's voice still haunts the corridors of modern psychology and leadership. Because whether in palaces or personal relationships, boardrooms or inner dialogue, the same truth remains. Power is not the opposite of goodness. It is its container. A generous heart without strong hands is left defenseless. A kind soul without a grounded spine gets lost in the winds of others' expectations. And a visionary mind without the courage to confront darkness, within and without, becomes little more than a dreamer, watching as braver, less ethical players shape the world. But what if we choose a different path? A new kind of goodness, one that includes the sacred right to say no, to lead, to set limits, to be misunderstood without crumbling. This is not new. It is ancient. It lives in the wisdom of warriors and sages, mystics and poets, rebels and saints. It's in the way the Bhagavad Gita begins not with love, but with Arjuna as paralysis on the battlefield, his fear of using power, and Krishna as call to action. You must act. You must fight, not out of hatred, but duty. Not for the ego, but the soul. It's in the teachings of Sufi masters who remind us that love without self-awareness leads not to union, but delusion. It's in the life of Harriet Tubman, who led with immense heart and fierce strategy, not seeking approval, seeking freedom. And it is found today in therapists' offices, meditation circles, executive trainings, and late-night journaling sessions, where people quietly unlearn the belief that being good means being small. This is the evolution of goodness. No longer childlike compliance, but mature, conscious, courageous love. A goodness that does not disappear in the face of criticism. A goodness that is not afraid of anger, truth, or change. A goodness that dares to protect what matters. The journey forward. Not perfection, but integration. If this exploration has stirred discomfort, that's a good sign. Growth often begins where our myths break down. You might be asking yourself, have I been good just to avoid conflict? Do I give in order to be seen? Have I confused love with approval? Where have I silenced myself in the name of being kind? These are not accusations. They are openings. The goal is not to reject goodness, it's to expand it, to reclaim the pieces we exiled, our voice, our instincts, our power, our right to take up space. You don't need to become someone else. You just need to become more of who you already are, beneath the scripts. Remember, you can be humble and still know your worth. You can be kind and still walk away. You can be honest and still be loved. You can be powerful and still be good. Back to the mirror. Let's return to the question that lives beneath this entire journey. What kind of person do you want to be when no one's watching? Not who the world tells you to be, not who your upbringing demanded, not even who you've always been, but who you are, when your heart and spine are aligned, when your no is as sacred as your yes, when your kindness is infused with truth, when your love includes you. That is powerful goodness. And the world doesn't just need it, it aches for it. Because in a time of performative virtue, fragile egos, and power without wisdom, those who can embody strength and soul together are the quiet revolutionaries. They won't make headlines, but they will shift the culture. One boundary at a time, one truth at a time, one life at a time. Let this be your invitation, not to become perfect, but to become real. a space for soulful power and deep reflection. If something in this message stirred you, if a part of you felt seen, perhaps the part that's always been kind but often exhausted, the part that's good but quietly angry, the part that's been trying to hold everyone else while feeling like you're slowly disappearing, then this space is for you. Here, we're not chasing perfection. We're reclaiming wholeness. We're exploring power not as dominance, but as the ability to stay rooted in truth, even when it's uncomfortable. We're learning how to love others without losing ourselves, and how to lead, with heart, with vision, and with boundaries that hold. Because the world doesn't need more people-pleasers. It doesn't need more masked politeness. It needs you, clear, present, self-aware, and real. This channel is a space for that journey, where deep psychology meets ancient wisdom, where Jung speaks with Rumi, where Machiavelli is reread not to justify manipulation, but to understand how integrity and power must walk together. Here, we ask better questions. We pause to reflect, not react. We grow from insight, not shame. And we believe that self-mastery isn't a luxury. It's the foundation for a meaningful life. So if you're drawn to conversations about emotional intelligence, archetypes, shadow work, leadership with soul, and the quiet strength of inner alignment, I invite you to subscribe, not out of urgency, but because you feel called, because you're ready for content that doesn't just entertain you, it challenges you, honors your depth, and helps you come home to yourself. Together, we're creating a new kind of strength, gentle, clear, grounded, awake. And if this resonated, know this: you're not alone. You're not broken. You're just becoming more whole than the world ever taught you to be. Let's keep walking this path, one reflection, one boundary, one breakthrough at a time. Subscribe, stay curious, and never forget, your goodness was never meant to be small.